Welcome back, everyone. Can you hear me? Still can't hear me? No. That's better. Okay, welcome back, everyone. It's our great privilege now to have a keynote session, and I'm delighted to introduce the President of the Royal Irish Academy, Professor Patrick Geary, I got it right now, to introduce our keynote speaker for today. So, President.
Thanks, Pádraig. Tánaiste, Ambassadóri agus a Gcuine Uaisle. Is mór an ordom bheithin ann fáilte cuir roimh go acadamh riaga na hÉirnin tróna. Is called táchtach é seo atá mar thora codramh agus cóhibrú idir an acadamh agus na Ryan gnóthaí ach trachtra. Tánaiste, it is a great honour to welcome you to the Royal Irish Academy to deliver the keynote address for today's International Affairs Conference. Today's meeting is the latest of a strong tradition of annual conferences on international affairs, and it reflects the important relationship the Academy has with the Department of Foreign Affairs. The Standing Committee for International Affairs benefits from a really positive working relationship with staff in that department, and we would like to recognise their continued engagement and involvement in both the committee and in today's conference. Emma Madigan, Aoife Lyons and Claire Woods have worked closely with Academy staff to ensure the success of today's event, and many thanks to them. I would also like to thank Professor Micheál Martin TD, along with other members of the working group from the Standing Committee for International Affairs who put together today's meeting. They include Colin Rafter, John Morrissey, and the editor of Irish Studies in International Affairs, Mervyn O'Driscoll. Tánaiste, is far from the first time you've had spoken here at the Academy, but it's the first time I've had the privilege to welcome you as President, a role I took on just 6 weeks ago. Feels a lot more than 6 weeks, I should say, but there you go. Since that time, of course, you've been very busy, notably welcoming Professor Biden on his visit and showing him around a very wet Carlingford and the North East. That visit highlighted the human connections so crucial to building strong international relationships and the particular skill the Irish have, both at home and in the diaspora, of finding or forging a personal link with whoever they encounter. The number of times I've been asked, do I know John Murphy from Cork? Anyhow, there are many Murphys in Cork, as you're well aware, Tánaiste. Your department is also managing the human impact of conflict, both in Ukraine and most recently in Sudan. And we all send our good wishes to those working in international agencies in these areas. I know that some people here today have colleagues and friends who are involved in aid work there, and I hope they remain safe and well. Today's conference has addressed topical and important issues in human security, and I'm sure you will have something important to contribute to that discussion. I look forward to hearing what you have to say. Agus go raibh míle maith agaibh go léir. Thank you.
President Geary, Dr. Carmody, Royal Irish Academy members, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the invitation to speak to you today. Agus dúspáir mo bhuiachas a gháil an acadamh sochtún cuireadh bheith privilégh anmhór domsa bheith I láthair an seo chun ó ráid seo a thuairt gáirithe I ggóthaíocht cuasaí idirnáisiúnta agus tá fearmhuíocht an acadamh sochtún chogáil atá eagraithe a gcuibh inmh chomá. And in addition, I can say to President Geary, there's a few Garys in Cork as well. Notwithstanding his Tipperary background, and we'll be doing battle next Sunday in Páirc Uí Chaoimh, on Saturday night, I think, actually. Yeah. Sorry? You win a lot there, that's right. Okay. And let's move on to more serious matters. or let's. I think it's important, and I appreciate so many people being here in the room. I think over the last few years during COVID and so on, we missed the opportunity to meet in person, to share information and ideas. And I think this type of convening of people to engage and discuss is very, very important. And particularly in an era where basic facts are often contested, your work in the Academy to amplify evidence-based research and knowledge is all the more important. You have asked me to speak today on human insecurity in an unsettled world. The title itself reflects the expansion of our traditional understanding of the concept of security from one focused mainly on military capabilities and readiness to manage interstate conflict to a multifaceted reality which encompasses protection from pandemics, from climate crises, from violations of human rights and international humanitarian law, from economic shocks, from cyber or hybrid threats. Today I want to focus my remarks on the key tool that enables us to effectively address all of these threats, the rules-based international order. The multilateral system, with the United Nations Charter at its heart, remains our strongest protection and our most important global security asset. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm undoubtedly not the first Irish Minister for Foreign Affairs to stand before you to make the case for multilateralism, and I'm sure I won't be the last. But now, more than ever, we need to speak clearly. Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, in blatant violation of the UN Charter, has challenged the multilateral system to its core. And it is this system that we in Ireland, inhabitants of a small, militarily neutral country, dependent on a functioning global trading system for our prosperity, rely on for our very existence as a sovereign and democratic nation. The creation of the United Nations out of the dark shadow of the Second World War was not inevitable. It required leadership, vision, hope and conviction. In the UN Charter, we recognise the equal right of all to live in peace. We proclaim that the community of nations will no longer be based on the will of the strong, but on common rules agreed by all. Likewise, in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, we recognise the equal right of all to live in dignity, to have their human rights and fundamental freedoms respected. These agreements are the expression of our common humanity. They are imbued with and reflect values that transcend nationality, ethnicity, or religion. They were carefully and painstakingly negotiated. They make clear that the project of peace, equality, and dignity is a project that belongs to everyone. History doesn't stop with the UN Charter and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, of course. As I said last year at the UN General Assembly, we now have an interlocking web of treaties, of norms, of resolutions, of international jurisprudence, of political declarations, and of agreed conclusions, which have been developed to underpin this global order. Each and every one has been negotiated by the global community. Collectively, we have spent millions of hours in windowless basements, vigorously arguing over every paragraph. All of us together are the architects of this order. No country can ignore its obligations. Quite simply, we not only all signed up to this order, we all created it together. For Ireland, our own experience of discrimination and injustice shaped our commitment to create a global system governed by agreed principles and values. It still shapes that commitment today. In the words of Frank Aiken, a man who knew the price of conflict at home and dedicated himself to global peace, and I quote, "Without a rule of law in world affairs, there can be no peace and security," unquote. For 100 years, Ireland has been an active, independent and vocal member of the international community. We were central to creating major disarmament and non-proliferation instruments, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and the Convention on Cluster Munitions. More recently, we've been at the forefront of setting ambitious global targets for sustainable development, for gender equality, for emissions reductions, and for accountability through the International Criminal Court. So when we see the multilateral system threatened so fundamentally, and by a permanent member of the UN Security Council, we know just what is at stake. Russia's actions, invading a neighbouring country, a fellow UN member state, blatantly disregarding the UN Charter, committing gross violations of human rights and international humanitarian law, committing potential war crimes and crimes against humanity, are not only utterly wrong in and of themselves. These actions also embolden those who benefit from a world once again governed by force and power. Ladies and gentlemen, how we respond to this matters. Our conviction and our staying power matters to Ukraine immensely, and it will matter to us all far into the future. Russia is counting on us growing tired of looking away. To do so would be a betrayal of Ukraine and its people, but it would also weaken the very system which protects our own freedom, security, and values. The United Nations has recorded over 22,000 civilian casualties in Ukraine since last February. This figure is likely to be only the tip of the iceberg. 8 million people have been forced to flee. 5 million people have been internally displaced within Ukraine. Ireland has welcomed over 80,000 Ukrainians since last February. As welcome as they are here, this is not a path that any of them have chosen freely. For the vast majority, if they could return to a peaceful, stable Ukraine, they would do so in a heartbeat. Russia has shown no sign of wanting to end this war. Its actions, organizing sham referendums to annex Ukrainian territory, threatening the use of weapons of mass destruction, attacking and occupying the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, announcing the stationing of nuclear weapons in Belarus, indiscriminately attacking civilians and civilian infrastructure, weaponizing food and energy supplies, abducting Ukrainian children and forcibly transferring them to Russia. These actions speak for themselves. Ordinary towns where people went about their daily lives have become bywords for horror. During our membership of the UN Security Council, we saw Russia abuse its position on the Council on a daily basis, preventing the Council from acting with its cynical use of the veto and spreading disinformation. Russia has also paralysed European regional peace and security bodies, such as the OSCE. Ireland has not stayed silent in the face of these violations. We've acted in lockstep with our European Union partners to defend the multilateral system. We've pushed for accountability, including through our support for the International Criminal Court and our decision to intervene in Ukraine's cases at the International Court of Justice and the European Court of Human Rights. Ireland is a militarily neutral country, but we are not politically or morally neutral. We will continue to support Ukraine for as long as it takes. We will not accept impunity for gross violations of international law and the principles of the United Nations Charter. Ladies and gentlemen, over 2 years on the Security Council came at a time of unprecedented turmoil. We have much to be proud of. I know that Minister Coveney spoke in detail about our achievements on the Council when he addressed you last November, and I won't repeat his words today. Reflecting on our term, though, one lesson stands out in particular. That is, that permanent membership of the UN Security Council is a privilege. It confers on those members a particular responsibility to defend and promote the United Nations Charter. All 5 permanent members of the Council, the 5 nuclear weapon states, have immense power and influence. It is incumbent on them to uphold the multilateral system which we have collectively created. This brings me to the role of China. The reopening of travel to China after almost 3 years of COVID lockdown has seen a number of high-level visits from European leaders to China in recent weeks. I met with Foreign Affairs Councillor Wang Yi myself at the Munich Security Conference in February. Conversations that we've been having online or not at all over the past few years are now possible in person. And this has led to an increased focus and much media commentary on China's role in the world and the European Union-China relationship. First, let me say that Ireland's engagement with China on global issues in fact increased during COVID rather than waned. This was largely due to our membership of the Security Council throughout 2021 and 2022. We worked closely with China across all the files on the Council's agenda. Our engagement was open and constructive. We did not always agree, but we were committed to consistent dialogue and negotiation. We were most successful in finding solutions when we were frank in our views and clear with each other about where we were willing to compromise and where we were not. In many ways, this is echoed in our bilateral relationship with China. It is a relationship that we value. The links between our countries have deepened over the years, as has our dialogue and our knowledge of one another. Our economic relationship has greatly expanded, reaching €34.5 billion in two-way trade in 2021. Investment in both directions has brought benefits to both our countries. We have built enduring links in education, in culture, and in tourism. In March, Minister Eamon Ryan visited Beijing, Shanghai, and Hong Kong to mark St. Patrick's Day. Last month, Minister of State Hayden visited Hainan and Shanghai to support Irish companies operating in China. I expect that this pace of visits to and from China will be maintained. Ahead of our visit to Beijing, President von der Leyen spoke of setting the terms of a healthy European Union engagement with China. We can certainly subscribe to this ambition. To be successful in this goal, however, we must be clear-eyed about China's strategic objectives and about what these might mean for the European Union and Ireland. China's worldview is different from ours. Our interests and values differ. This reality will inevitably shape how we engage with one another. Many commentators describe this scenario as a West against the rest scenario. There's much chatter about US-China competition and about the need for the European Union to avoid being squeezed between these two hegemons to build and maintain its strategic autonomy. I disagree with this framing. Let me go back to where I started. The multilateral system, with the UN Charter at its heart, is a system that all of us, China, Ireland, the United States, created together. No country, however large or powerful, can ignore or disregard or sidestep this reality. Every country has an obligation to uphold the Charter. That is our starting point in analysing and assessing China's global engagement and ambitions. We want to work constructively together, addressing climate change, advancing sustainable development, ensuring the protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms for all, building a fair and open global trading and investment system. But we are not naive, and we do not intend to be silent when we see evidence of core principles being undermined. President von der Leyen spoke about the concept of de-risking but not decoupling, an idea increasingly embedded in European Union discourse on China. At its heart, we see de-risking as developing our economic and systemic resilience to in turn protect our values and interests. It does not mean turning our backs on an economic, diplomatic, and cultural relationship with China. Far from it. There are many mutual beneficial ties that we can nourish and grow. We will continue to support many of our businesses in their engagement with China and to work with the Chinese companies established in Ireland to create jobs and build prosperity. Alongside this, we will also work with European Union partners to shore up our economic security. We will continue to advocate strongly for a level playing field for global trade and investment, and in line with the objectives in our trade and investment strategy, we will increase our focus on supply chains and securing Ireland's position in global value chains. Much of this work lies within the ambit of government, but it is not confined to government only. The private sector, academia, and other domestic partners need to reflect on how they can continue to build valuable relationships in China in areas where it makes sense to do so. They need also, though, to assess their level of exposure and identify areas where it may be necessary to de-risk. Ireland will continue to be clear about areas of particular importance to us in our engagement with China. First, Ukraine. In February, China published a position paper on the war. This paper reiterated China's belief in respecting the sovereignty of all countries, in line with the purposes and the principles of the United Nations Charter. It made clear China's opposition to the use of nuclear weapons and attacks on nuclear facilities. It emphasized the importance of international humanitarian law and the protection of civilians. All of this is very welcome. However, the paper failed to call out Russia's aggression. To date, China's proposals for peace have not acknowledged that Russia started this war and that it is Russia that can and must end it. The recent state visit of President Xi Jinping to Moscow was a visual demonstration of the close ties between the two countries. At key moments during Ukraine's re-emergence as a sovereign state after the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991, China has assured Ukraine of its support for its sovereignty and territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders. I call on China to reflect on this commitment and to use its considerable influence to end Russia's war. This would honor the principles of the UN Charter and the wishes of the overwhelming majority of United Nations member states. President Xi's call with President Zelensky last week and his decision to send China's special representative on Euro-Asian affairs to Ukraine is a very positive step. Second, Ireland will continue to underline our expectation to China that they will honour the existing multilateral system. I welcome China's active participation at the United Nations and other global fora. That participation is essential. But China also has a responsibility to ensure that its policies, including proposals such as the Global Security Initiative and the Global Civilization Initiative, serve to strengthen the existing global security architecture. We will continue to emphasize to China the importance of the protections afforded to states and individuals by the UN Charter and the broader United Nations framework. And we will be unambiguous in our opposition to initiatives that do not reflect the purposes and principles of the Charter. We will also be clear that the maintenance of stability and the status quo in relation to Taiwan is critical. Any attempt to change the status quo by force would not be acceptable. I can only agree with my German colleague, Minister Baerbock, when she said that any serious escalation would have consequences for all countries. Let there be no doubt, Ireland adheres to and will continue to adhere to the One China policy. This means that we do not have diplomatic relations with Taiwan. We recognize the People's Republic of China as the legal representative of China. That is not in question. But this does not preclude the development of economic, cultural, and people-to-people connections with Taiwan, nor the meaningful participation of Taiwan in relevant multilateral fora. Third, partnership with China on global challenges remains a necessity. Whether on global health, on climate change, or on the delivery of the Sustainable Development Goals, China is a key interlocutor. Minister Ryan's meetings in China in March, for instance, had a strong focus on climate and on preparation for this year's COP meeting in Dubai. China is home to 1.4 billion people. It is the world's largest CO2 emitter. It is an economic powerhouse that can deliver, and indeed is delivering, innovative solutions to mitigate the climate crisis. We will continue to ask China to step up to a leadership role anchored in agreed multilateral approaches. Fourth, Ireland will continue to prioritise the preservation and promotion of human rights, a critical pillar of the multilateral system. This year marks the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. That declaration is, so to speak, what it says on the tin, universal. It articulates the basic rights and fundamental freedoms that all human beings on this planet deserve to enjoy. Last year, the former UN Commissioner for Human Rights, Micheál Bachelet, published her assessment of the human rights situation in Xinjiang, and the findings were stark. It reported that the scale of the arbitrary and discriminatory detention of members of the Uyghur and other predominantly Muslim groups may constitute international crimes, in particular crimes against humanity. Such a serious finding demands action. I have raised the report directly with my Chinese counterparts, urging compliance with its recommendations. Ireland has consistently and publicly voiced our concerns at the United Nations. We will continue to do so. I sincerely regret that China effectively block discussion of the report at the United Nations Human Rights Council. Ireland's message on human rights will remain consistent, whether in relation to Xinjiang, Tibet, Hong Kong, or elsewhere. China has an obligation to act in a manner that ensures full respect for the rule of law. China, like every other UN member state, must comply with its human rights obligations. During our recent commemorations of the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement, I was reminded that peace and prosperity, if they are to endure, must be grounded in principles of human rights, equality, respect, dialogue, and engagement. These are the principles that guide Irish foreign policy. They will continue to guide our engagement with all members of the global community. Thank you very much indeed.
Micheál Martin Tánaiste gur an óráid tábhachtach sin agus tá méid fear buíochtait as ucht bheith an seo aniu linn a chun na rudaí seo caintlein faoin na rudaí seo tá siad an tábhachtach don domhan ar fad agus gur Micheál Martin. Thank you, Tánaiste, for a very important speech. We're very grateful for you taking the time to be here to discuss these issues with us at a time of critical importance for global security. So thank you very much on behalf of the Academy. So it now falls to me to have some closing remarks. It's been a very stimulating day, and it's kind of difficult to try and distill everything down that we've heard today, but I have been making notes during the course of the day, so I thought I'd try and do a kind of quick summary. I was watching, I think it was Sky TV, maybe about 6 months ago, and Gordon Brown said, if the world were a country, it would be a failed state. And that was quite a stark comment, I thought, coming from a British Prime Minister. This was a signal that was something seriously wrong and that people at that level of influence and experience were drawing attention to it. And we've heard today about permacrisis, omni-crisis, what's the other one that's used? Polycrisis. And yet there's also progress. It's not all doom and gloom. We heard from our other keynote speaker about progress in human development. So we exist in a space where there's both progress and then there's things that are happening that are undesirable. And how do we maximize in the global system those things that are positive and try and break down barriers to positive change? What kinds of new institutions might be needed for this new era? What kind of revivification and refortification of existing institutions might be needed to protect the positive elements of the international order while reforming them to be more just and inclusive? Our speakers drew attention to issues around invisibilization. Whose voices get heard? Whose voices get marginalized? How can we make sure that we're listening to people on the front lines of climate change or gender-based violence or other issues? How do we need to rethink our own perspectives and institutions to try and include those other heretofore marginalized perspectives? We also heard about the dangers of the co-optation of the discourse of human security. So it sounds, who could be against human security? It sounds very progressive, and yet there can be creep, as we heard about in some of the talks. Sometimes people use it to their own ends, maybe not ones that are very desirable from a social point of view. We heard the importance of a human-centric perspective. We live in a world of nation states, and yet those nation states are designed to serve people. And if they're not, of course they do, but if they're not serving people to their maximum effect, then we need to rethink that. How do we put people at the center of security? We heard about maritime insecurity, for example, and other examples, where there's legal slippages or legal black holes they were referred to. What kind of reforms are needed to try and close or bridge those black holes? What kinds of different visionings do we need? Listening to people, indigenous people, for example? How do we dissolve so-called abysmal lines between people and cultures? Surely, one of the things I took from today is that we have national identities, but surely our primary identity should be as people, and that we should show compassion and solidarity to people in need or people who are suffering around the world. And Ireland has a very long and distinguished record in terms of its foreign policy in trying to achieve that. Insecurity is gendered. That was another one of my take-homes. Again, people experience security and insecurity differently, depending on their gender or their geographical positionality, for example. But progress is possible. We heard about the vaccine treaty. So the idea that we will have a global community which will prioritize people's health as a collective rather than certain countries or people engaging in vaccine nationalism or hoarding, for example. But one of the lessons maybe we can learn from the pandemic is that we need to be redirective rather than responsive. So we've learned the lessons of the pandemic, but it was a hard lesson, millions of people killed. What can we do to try and ward off similar kinds of crises in the future and protect against them now, rather than just having a reactive response? My final take-home from today is that cooperative action and identity is possible. And I'd like to thank all of the speakers, and in particular our keynote speakers, for their attendance and for sharing their insights with us today. So thank you all very much. And with that, I'd like to close the conference, but we will now move to the reception rooms where we will launch the journal Irish Studies and International Affairs. So I hope you can join us for that. Thank you.